Thank you, Emily, once again. And we'll directly start asking our questions. So, Sherry.
Yes. How do you define creative autonomy in context of semi-peripheral music industries, and how does it differ from definitions in core capitalist economies?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. And indeed, defining autonomy, which is a really complex question in any context, is one of it's an important aspect that I try at least attempt to deal with in the book. And one of the main starting points of this intervention is the fact that there seems to be, when talking about autonomy, creative autonomy in the context of cultural labor, most Western-centric accounts, there is vast literature based in the UK, for instance, Western Europe, the United States, dealing with creative labor, tends to focus on like the art versus commerce or creativity versus profit concerns. So like the market and market forces versus artistic concerns, artistic self-expression, whether in a subcultural context or in the context of the cultural industries, the formalized cultural industries. Whereas in Eastern Europe, so at least in this specific part of the global semi-periphery, we tend to speak about creative autonomy more in relation to creative workers versus the state, which in post-socialist countries particularly is explained by the fact that there is this legacy of strong state control of the arts, of cultural production during the socialist period. But it still seems quite difficult to articulate the same or a similar kind of critique of capitalism and capitalist forces as in Western accounts. So I think there is something missing in both. And of course, I don't want to suggest, or I don't think that we can and we should separate capitalism and the state, because the state, I think, is an important actor that organizes or creates the conditions of capital accumulation in any national or international context. But at least analytically, I mean, I wanted to highlight or to emphasize that it's important to focus on both relations of dependence or independence from global capitalist forces, whether it's the logic of platformization, which is something that is very relevant for musicians and people working for the music industry today, as well as local forces related to the state, cultural policy, media policy, and so forth. So it's very on a very broad brush level. This is how we began dealing with this question.
And you discussed deep skepticism among Hungarian musicians regarding state funding, talent shows, and radio gatekeeping. And how does this perceived corruption and lack of transparency impact musicians' sense of creative autonomy and legitimacy?
Yeah, skepticism certainly, but also a kind of, I would say, a generally passive acceptance of the status quo, whatever that may be at the particular moment. And there is a term that I use, this pragmatic or strategic apoliticism, which at certain moments in time shifts at the moment, and we're coming close to the elections next year. Again, there is a moment of politicization at the moment happening on the popular music seen, and we've seen waves of this in the past, but very generally after and not only after the post 2010 period, the subsequent Fidesz governments, but even before, from the time of the regime change, this general expressed criticism and kind of not questioning whatever whether it's the funding system of popular music, which for a long time didn't exist at all, or the principles behind funding, that there is a lot of and increasing selectivity, is not necessarily questioned, and I go into some detail into why that is, or what the material conditions behind that seem to be. But so in the period that I cover, which focuses mostly on the latter half of the 2010s decade, which is the time when I did interviews and other forms of qualitative inquiry among musicians and music industry workers, and the years preceding that. There, so first, starting from 2007, there was a period when the public service, what became a popular music themed radio, MR2, took on an active role in promoting upcoming Hungarian bands and artists. There was quite a bit of variety in terms of genres. So still mostly alternative rock, but also some hip hop, some with less emphasis, some electronic music based artists, and live music festivals, which became quite big during the years preceding that, or during those years, supported or there was a kind of a symbiosis between these two. So they also supported the same artists and bands. And this period, which went up until 2012 or 2014, when periods of major restructuring came in public service media in general. The Fidesz government basically tightened control of the media hugely, and there was a lot of downsizing and changing of policy as well. So this, what a lot of musicians still refer to as a kind of golden age for upcoming bands and alternative music in Hungary, came to a stop, and the Hungarian, interestingly, the Hungarian repertoire on public service radio was narrowed down following this, and there are a number of preferred artists who, so not all of them, but some of them are known to be or explicitly close to the government in ideological terms, or certainly not going against them in any way. So they still receive plenty of radio plays. But just as this, so this change was happening from 2014, the government introduced a program for the funding of popular music through the National Cultural Fund. And that is something that in a way replaced the role of the radio, at least for some artists. But again, there has been a lot of debates around how inclusive, or indeed how useful in terms of a career of an artist or a band, if then they might get support for an album or for a tour, but then it's not backed by radio publicity or other means, and even people responsible for the program themselves were complaining, even though it's a state-funded program, that there's somehow a lack of coherence between media policy and this cultural program. So there's essentially, if in lack of the mentioned radio support, it is problematic for artists to maintain the potential advantage that they gain through the program. So it's a kind of an interesting mismatch between different efforts or goals that many industry people as well as musicians were feeling and articulating. Nevertheless, most of the musicians that I talked to applied, at least in the very broadly defined rock music world, did apply for funding. Many of them were successful with at least applications. So it's something that that musicians used and did, as I mentioned, did not necessarily openly criticize.
I see.
Thank you. Next question I'll ask. Like in your analysis of gig economy, you borrowed the term manufactured consent. How do you see digital platforms creating an illusion of independence while actually reinforcing precarious and competitive working conditions? And how does that work in Hungarian scene?
Yes, I found the perspective of the labor process and talking about or looking at issues of control and potential resistance that doesn't necessarily happen, and indeed manufacturing consent and other conclusions or terminology from classic labor process analyses very useful. So yes, there is on the one hand a general discourse on the part of many musicians and independent of genre. I would say that reinforces this kind of notion of disintermediation and independence that we are able to build an audience for ourselves. We don't have to depend on in the Hungarian context, and this is again a difference from Western context, not necessarily on a record label, because we've never really had a strong system with strong record labels, or only for a very, very short period of time in the 1990s, but on, for instance, the state or corporate actors, but mostly in independence, in just a general sense. So in a kind of very so it is definitely an entrepreneurial, not explicitly, but definitely pro, I don't know, neoliberal capitalist mindset. Nevertheless, most of these musicians would also very openly share their experiences about how difficult, how tiring, how kind of against their artistic autonomy, in the sense that what they enjoy doing, or what they indeed have the feel they have the skills for doing, which is doing things with music. So how much time investment in terms of material things, but also once again emotional labor, time, and I also talk a lot about other people's investments, of family members, friends. All of these, what I call amateur helpers, go into just the maintaining of attention that that platforms, whether streaming or so content-based or social media platforms, require for them. So so there is a coexistence of this kind of critique that it is always somehow still justified by saying, yeah, but this is my own choice, and I'm so I think to an important extent, musicians and the music industry in general does play a role in reproducing these narratives or discourses around well, basically platform capitalism.
Yeah.
Which is a critical point that we can make, I think.
Yeah. And the book identifies the home as a central space of music production and labor, especially in post-pandemic world. And how does this domestic setting challenge traditional notions of professional workspaces in music? I mean, you already mentioned a few points.
Yes, again, this is something that I thought important to actively engage with, because it's because I already found during previous research that I was doing that that the home is becoming a very important, and of course it's not only myself, but there are studies that that talk about home-based studios or DIY production within the home. Digital technology, and online technology enables production from within the space of the home, and that also raised questions. And I myself asked some of those questions, especially from a gender perspective, whether that enables people who were generally excluded from or partly excluded from the mainstream or hegemonic spaces of music production to enter the space of music, or be able to I don't know, experiment and create audiences from themselves and so forth. And then I found in the research as well that it's not all, so it's not only digital technology based home studios, but there is such a wide range of activities that, and it's not necessarily a new thing, but of course digital technology and then the pandemic, so external forces as well helped this process. But there's so much activity around music that takes place within the home, whether it's rehearsing, whether it's managing the affairs of a band or artists, all of the not all, but so much of the self-promotion work that the mentioned platform demand from musicians. So the home indeed serves as an important center for much of the behind-the-scenes work, and then some of the work that's visible as well. So I became interested in then how domestic social relations, once again, gender relations, but just in general, dynamic, emotional dynamics, informal divisions of labor within a household, whether it's a family or even housemates, where housemates support one another. And again, there were interesting examples at the time of COVID, and the utilization of informal resources feeds into ultimately the economy of music.
You also mentioned the hip hop scene as a space of pronounced gender inequality. Like, what specific mechanisms, like both social, institutional, do you see sustaining the marginalization of women in Hungarian hip hop?
Yes, well, a lot of the gendered inequalities that found were well characterized all genres, or basically they were all of the kind of naturalizing of various forms of work, especially around management, whether that management is formalized or not. But there were some things that were specific about hip hop that I found stemming from the characteristic forms of collaboration, basically. So in hip hop, and I understand in the chapter, I understand hip hop in a broad sense, so not only traditional hip hop, but kind of hip hop based genre, including what Stephen Gamble calls hip hopified pop. So the hip hop becomes a template, that there is a beat, and then there's a rapper or the singers, collaboration. So this collaboration and a lot of the time temporary collaboration. So for one particular track or one particular album, collaborations are really important in this. I wouldn't even say scene, but more generally in this music world, and almost exclusively the women that I encountered, not necessarily just the ones that I interviewed, but just the ones that are visible. They are exclusively singers or rappers, not producers, unless they, the few of them that start producing their own songs, usually after some negative experiences with male producers, and there are so the way it works, there's either no record label involved or small record labels who are which are usually set up, or this is a typical thing that a male producer artist would set up a record label with those for releasing their own music as well as people around them, so that there would be a broader collective, and then they would recruit new artists, usually young singers, young rappers around them for collaborations. But they would run, for instance, the YouTube channels as well. So when I spoke to these young women who started collaborating with better known male artists, it will always be so even if they wrote their own parts, and a lot of the time when there is a featured singer, they would write their own parts. That means music and lyrics as well, and a lot of the time, for instance, a chorus sung by a female singer would be the main selling point of the song. They would receive no writing credit. They wouldn't receive any of the copyright income, and they would always say, well, they go and do gigs with the male artist, and then they receive some money. Usually they would quote a amount, but yeah, basically it's just a form of I don't know, networking that they should be I guess grateful for. But then some of the ones I spoke to, they were really critical of this relation, and as I mentioned, some of them started really writing and releasing their own music, and taking more or just becoming more conscious, and also there was some female solidarity as well, that they would start cooperating with other women, or realizing together kind of the really bad contracts that they were in, and just deciding together, okay, let's leave this. But this kind of exploitation was really widespread, and yeah, up until today, there's this very small number of female artists on the scene who would again who would produce their own songs, or at least would be able to get or to own the writing credit and the copyright. And so this was specific to this scene, but then there's so many levels of which is basically the division of labor, whether formal or informal. That's very gendered, that I would find basically in any scene that I looked at.
Okay. And how can musicians become more aware of the invisible forms of labor that sustain their work, and what practical steps could make this labor more visible and fairly valued?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, because I have ideas, but it's very it's quite difficult to put this into practice. So there are some, or at least my diagnosis was that even though there are some professional bodies, including a musicians' union, that would that you would expect to work towards such goals, but they don't really do this. And it was quite interesting that even though there is a musicians' union that has existed for more than 100 years, actually most of the musicians I talked, actually none of the musicians that I talked to as part of the study knew about this organization. It mostly, so the membership mostly consists of partly music teachers, and then musicians in classical music, or folk music, some jazz musicians. So there was a and those weren't necessarily the musicians that I interviewed. So there is kind of a genre-based explanation for this as well, but it was quite interesting that they weren't even aware that there was at least formally an institution that and some musicians said, wouldn't it be great if we had a union? So the COVID crisis was kind of a natural moment when some of these efforts became more pronounced, and I so in the final chapter of the book, I briefly reflect on some attempts that were formed within certain segments, articulating some aspects of the precarious livelihoods of musicians but also during the COVID crisis, but also before, and in general, including the formation of a new branch of the union. But as it often happens, it was mostly up to the efforts of one particular artist who was really enthusiastic, but then the rest of the members who became members were kind of sitting back and waiting for things to happen, and so it wasn't really sustainable, unfortunately. In the long run, there was also or it still formally exists, a group of female music industry professionals that formed during the COVID era, which at least at the beginning was quite active in articulating problems around the invisibility of much of their work, and just problems with, I don't know, sexism in the industry in general, how their work was being devalued, or just general obstacles that facing in their everyday work. But again, that was quite brief, because that once live music events could happen again, it again became a busy period, and quite a tense period, because that immediately an energy crisis and huge inflation, and so various crises followed the COVID crisis in Hungary, which venues and organizations have had to deal with up until today. Up until today, festivals keep closing. Again, this year, 3 festivals announced that they would have the last event this summer. So it's an ongoing crisis, definitely in live music in Hungary, which I suppose industry professionals struggle with. And of course, so it's a paradox, because this is exactly the situation where you would need strong organizations, whether formal or informal, that represents interests or but the working conditions and the difficulty of making a living in general, so all of the material difficulties make this or work against this.
Thank you. That was all our questions, and it seems like your findings are very relevant in Turkey. The situation is actually pretty the same here.
I would love
especially
to hear more.
after
Yes,
post-pandemic period.
I've read some accounts, and I've noticed those parallels too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.